Hi, welcome to Procom's Fireside Chat today on where is the IT market heading in 2025. Let me introduce myself first. My name is Chris Bekich. I'm the moderator of this discussion. I am a vice president at Procom. I have over 25 years of experience in the staffing industry, in particular in the IT and professional sectors. I collaborate with organizations ranging from emerging startups to Fortune 500s. Over the past few months, my discussions with industry leaders have frequently revolved around this question. Chris, where is the IT market heading in 2025? This reoccurring theme inspired me to invite two subject matter experts to join me today for this chat. First, I'm going to introduce Ron Hetrick. Ron is a senior labor economist and vice president of staffing at Lightcast. Ron has over 30 years of experience in labor economics. He's a leading expert in the current state of the U.S. labor market and is often quoted in the media by CBS, CNBC, and the Wall Street Journal. Ron is passionate about educating companies concerning the labor market and the world that surrounds them. Welcome, Ron.
Thank you for having me.
Next, I'm going to introduce Pam Sands. Pam is the Vice President of Strategy and Partnership in the Diversity Offices at Kelly Services. She has extensive experience across the human capital ecosystem and is passionate about the transformative power of work, focusing on shaping a future that redefines not only who does the work, but also how it gets done. Pam has multiple workforce and supplier management certifications and has been recognized for her contributions in the workforce ecosystem and her company's success, including being named to the 2023 and 2024 Staffing Industry Analyst Global Power 150 and International 50 Women in Staffing list. Welcome, Pam.
Great to be
We're going to hop right into it. I'm going to start off with the U.S. election is recently completed, and we now know who's moving forward. So what I'm going to ask you too is what do you see regarding the policy changes that will impact the IT labor market in the U.S.? Pam, do you want to lead off?
Sure, I'll get us started. I think one of the things I would say is follow the funding, right, or follow the money, right? There are a lot of opportunities that are out there right now for new innovation to come forward in the market, and there are policies that I think are going to be leaning in that direction. So look at where the funding's going, where there's opportunity for things as far as what's going to happen with the CHIPS Act is an example, right? In this new administration, how we look at the manufacturing of in the semiconductor space here in the United States, and what jobs are going to follow that. And I think there's a significant opportunity there for us to really jump into where the demand is going to be, what new jobs are going to be created, and how we can really look to align our talent strategies with what that demand is going to be.
Thanks, Pam. Ryan, can you add more comments?
Sure. If you go back to the first Trump administration, one of the things that he was kind of known for was he really got very strict about the H-1B program. Look, if these are things that can be done here, we're not going to allow you to bring people in, through the H-1B program. That kind of, at the time, really kind of rectified a situation that maybe had gotten a little bit out of control. I'd be interested to see, I didn't really hear it on the campaign trail, if this is something he really wants to go after again. It seems like a lot of the focus has been in the non-IT space. But if you kind of look at the IT space, some of the things that he's mentioned, so it is going to be interesting, as Pam said, about following the money, is de-emphasizing kind of the green energy kind of things, de-emphasizing, other components like the CHIPS Act, Building America Forward, all these kind of things. It'll be interesting to see if we see, AI get more investment, because he's kind of friendly with the people who are, heavily invested in the AI side of things. So I think in that sense, you're going to see the ball that was already rolling is going to keep rolling forward. But I wouldn't be surprised to see some of this kind of the alternative technologies and things get a little less interest in the next 4 years.
Thank you. Let's move on to question 2, and we'll start with Ron on this one. What trends are we observing in job order volumes, and how might these evolve into 2025?
Something has really gotten interesting over the second half of 2024, and that is we are seeing postings for IT positions increasing across a number of companies that aren't IT staffing. So it's not that companies aren't hiring IT, it's just they're kind of choosing to do it on their own. Now, the nature of this is kind of varied. It kind of covers all of these these gamuts. However, I think we're going to talk about this a little later, but what they're looking for is so indicative of, kind of large language models and AI and machine learning. There's a lot of emphasis on grammar and communication. I think this whole world we're seeing invented about, these prompt engineers is kind of coming to light. So I see that companies, I think they are still in, this kind of investment part of that. We saw a lot of money going into this space. I think companies want to see these things coming to fruition in 2025. I fully expect that to happen. As that's happening, remember, one thing that we were looking at was this kind of private equity venture capital money going in and helping people kind of fund those expansions into these new technologies. We are starting to see that industry come alive again. The monies are starting to flow back in. So I do expect that you're going to see progress in 2025 that you did not see in 2024, as far as seeing applied innovations, seeing where this technology is going a little bit more than we got to see in this past year.
Thanks, Ron. Pam?
Yeah, I really love that last statement that you had, Ron, which is around applied innovations, right? And in talking about what's happening right now, I think what's really important for all of us to do is to actually push that vision forward and look at this from not only what's going to happen in 2025, but what are we looking at as far as trends into 2030? And the reason for that is that with the venture capital infusion of funds into the economy, and with the way that the world of work has changed and will continue to change, we're going to be looking for positions and opportunities that don't exist today, just like we've seen over the last several years in record numbers, right? So if we push ourselves forward and look at the future and look at 2030 and work our strategies backwards, that's where we can infuse some things like upskilling and reskilling. And how are we actually developing the workforce? How are we reaching even underserved communities and the broad range of talent in a market to give skills for those positions that may become available? So as we look at volumes and we look at our ability to scale, we're actually part of creating that workforce and not just, providing them or managing them. And I think that's a really exciting place to be in the conversation, and really look forward to how can we drive some of that conversation to address demand and volumes in a little bit different way.
And one thing I'll add to this conversation is in the last few weeks since the election, at Procon, we've seen an uptick in IT labor positions coming in for contract labor and project-based work. One of the interesting things is companies are asking us to do some data analysis and design work for projects that will start in the first quarter next year. So that is exciting to us. And then the other part that's happened is a lot of RFPs that were sitting silent that all of a sudden have come to award. So you're seeing the market say, okay, we're ready to roll forward. I think I'm very optimistic about first quarter and second quarter 2025. Moving to the next question, we'll start with Pam first on this one. How does the current balance of supply versus demand affect IT labor?
This is one that I find really fascinating, Chris, because again, looking forward and what's happening in the world around us and what we are predicting are going to happen in the next even 5 or 10 years, it's important to take that horizon scan and looking at what's happening in labor markets around us globally as we look at how we procure talent and how we help procure talent for our clients. One of the things that I've been following, and I think is a really fascinating way for us to look at this overall and what's going to happen in that supply and demand in this space, especially in IT, is looking at organizations like the ILO or OECD or the World Economic Forum. And what are some of those things that are happening that are drivers for this conversation? And there's a couple of scenarios that I find really curious that I want to share today and get people thinking about them a little differently. And those 3 scenarios are looking at this as like a multi-track world, a virtual world, and a vulnerable world, right? And I'll give just a quick update on each of those. I encourage folks to go out to the OECD report, even though it was done in 2021, there's still a lot of relevance to that today. So the multi-track world is one where you see economies that are aligned politically and economically come together and say, how can we do more together while distancing themselves from others who are not like-minded, right? So think about when you've got staffing and you're looking for cross-border recruitment, right, amongst countries and where talent works, where they sit, where they actually produce the work for, how that person is paid and what currency. That kind of multi-track world is really fascinating to dive into. And I know later in our conversation, we'll be talking around some things around policy and labor market regulations, but it's all in that world. The next one we're all really familiar with, which is the virtual world. But as we see that accelerate and it becomes more commonplace that we're working in virtual arrangements like this, I mean, just think about it. This would have been an in-person conversation at an event 5 years ago, and we're doing this virtually. It's just part of our everyday world, right? Is to really look at how are we bringing the right skill sets from a supply perspective to meet the demand that comes along with the requirements of a virtual world, just simply stated in that. And then the third one, of course, is the vulnerable world, something we've all experienced even post-COVID, right? And what can happen from a pandemic perspective, or from what's happening with wars around the globe, or social unrest, and how do those type of things, and even climate change, influence how people work? And therefore, if it influences how we work, it influences how we provide staffing, no matter which industry we're speaking to. So it influences the supply of the labor that's available, as well as the demand. So these are some curious ways that we can also look at this to be not only fireproof for our clients and for our businesses, but also future-proof them as well.
100%. Ron.
In the recent analysis that we were doing, we categorized industries into kind of categories, like almost you would do a hurricane. Cat 5, you are right in the path of storm. You're probably going to take a lot of destruction, all the way to a Cat 1, where you probably aren't going to notice as much pain in the labor force going forward. We actually categorized IT in the Cat 1 category, primarily because companies are only limited by their own policies at this point. You see some companies, kind of ordering back to the office, mandates and everything. However, that's, those things change. So people had it, then they kind of are taking it away. But if pressed again, they can get more liberal with those things again. And I look at that and you say the world of work, which can happen through immigration or through globalization or hiring people locally, or even automation. All of these avenues are available to the IT space. Let's talk about it as a horizontal, even more than an industry. Everybody and any company can look at an IT workforce and say, hey, look, it's up to our tolerance for risk. We could go all over the globe. We can go to South America now, which is really kind of coming on board and bringing up developers. You can go to the Middle East countries. You can go to the Far East. You can go through a lot of the Eastern Bloc countries. All of these things are open to you as avenues now. It really does come down to how good companies are at managing kind of those environments. We already have had a couple decades of experience of putting work into India. We're all very comfortable with that, but how comfortable are we with putting these into maybe African nations as they start to come on board with these kind of things? But that's what's almost exciting about the future, is ideas will not have to go undiscovered because of a lack of talent. It's just going to come down to the ability for companies, the companies that are going to lead the charge are the ones who are going to have, the most exploratory power of all the other ones out there, as far as finding those niches, finding affordable, really high quality developers. Where are they emerging from, and investing in those places before other people get in there and start to kind of deplete that labor pool.
Ron, great points. And for our next question, you kind of hinted on this a little bit earlier, but we'll dive a little deeper here. What role does venture capital and private equity play in driving demand for specific IT skills? Ron, you want to take the first shot at that?
Yeah, I think, we are the ship is boarded. We are taking off from the dock. We really do know what's going to happen in the IT space over the next several years. Could be the next 5 to 7. Who knows how long, this particular thing lasts. But artificial intelligence, it's rampant throughout the job descriptions that we see, are not really the job posting language. All of these skill sets that are being asked for, the two largest, most in demand languages are Python and SQL. I mean, anything where you're starting to handle this manipulation of large data sets, that is the thing. Everybody's kind of going full bore. And I was talking about this earlier. We are in the proof years. Like, you have to start to have revenue generating ideas. The times for that really kind of cool initial thoughts, those are nice, but are they generating revenue? If a program develops a song and kind of copies another artist, well, that's nice, but does that generate revenue? And companies are going to have to start to take this technology and really start to bring it in and say, how do we do this to either increase our profitability or have it generate ideas in a way that we can make money off of those in a repetitive way? Because I think you're really looking for, money's made in IT when you can get people to keep buying something. So cell phones constantly need upgraded, apps constantly need upgraded. I think we're kind of looking for what will be the model for AI where people can make money off of it in a repeatable way going forward. And I think that that's going to have to start taking place next year.
So Ron, and in one of your previous speeches, I saw you mentioned that private equity is sitting in over a billion, or I think you said $1 trillion.
Yeah, it's trillion. Yes.
We're starting to see that come to fruition. Anything else you can add about where you see PE coming into the market in the first, second quarter with that money?
Yeah, I mean, we are definitely seeing them going back into IT. Now, if we follow PE spending, and you could see this throughout the job postings that were occurring, in the early 2020s, private equity tends to invest in mid-sized companies. So it's not really those mom and pop shops, the places less than 50 people, and it's not mega corporations because private equities, these companies are already well established. What they do is they tend to buy companies that are incubating ideas, and then they put those companies together. So if you think about IT staffing, that's the bread and butter of IT staffing. Project work, mid-sized companies that need to come to market with a viable product within a year or two. This is prime ground for IT, and this is what private equity firms look at and say, I can't hold these companies forever. The way it works is you buy them, you bring them together, you do what you need to do, you divest some things, and then you sell those products off. So I think as private equity re-enters this space, look for those kind of mid-sized companies that have great ideas, just need a little bit of capital, and that's where you're going to start to see a lot of opportunity coming up, especially I think next year.
Great. Pam?
Yeah, just a couple of thoughts on that because it's a fascinating space right now to be looking at, right? It's really exciting, and I think we're going to see so much movement there. But I think we also look at it for how's it changing the game, right? So there's the demand for this type of talent with these kind of investments is going to be really strong. So imagine that it's creating a different type of client that talent can work for. And so it's new and it's fresh and it's exciting and it's innovative, and they can bring their entrepreneurial or entrepreneurial best self to that. And it's going to create competition across the client landscape for where the best talent is going to go. So keeping an eye on that, I think, is going to be fascinating as well. And I think that's also something to say, how is this really changing the landscape? And in our conversation with talent, that's where those really thoughtful interview processes come in, which is really understanding where that talent wants to work. And then also helping our existing clients and new clients with what is their value proposition in the market, because it's going to change what's going to help make that decision for that talent where they want to go. And I think we're also going to see a lot of IT talent, as we've seen already, become those entrepreneurs themselves and be looking for some of that venture capital as well. So it's an exciting time. And I really want to go back and listen to this recording that we're doing right now in 2 or 3 years and say, how close were we?
100%. Great segue to our next question, which is, where do you guys see IT skill sets going in 2025 as top priorities? Ron, do you want to lead off there?
Yeah, I was kind of already going down that path. We are past the days of the grinders, the people just sit there and just grind out code. What we're asking from workers in the IT space is that ability to really coherently bring ideas together. So if you're navigating something like artificial intelligence, that communication ability is incredibly important. I mean, if you don't understand how a user is going to be using this product, the kind of questions they're going to be asking, what does bad information look like? That is kind of skill sets. In the past, you just told somebody, we need this to do this. There was never a question of, well, why does it need to do that? Because I need to make sure that at the end that the user doesn't have a really horrible experience with that. And I think in the space that we're in now, IT workers across the board are really going to be expected to have a much more kind of mature knowledge of what their business is trying to accomplish, how you're going to utilize this technology, as I was talking about before, to generate revenue. It's not going to be tasked, what do they call them? The army, the soldiers. We're beyond the soldier stage. And I think you're going to continue to see this kind of development into that space of IT people being well-rounded. Yes, they can handle data. Yes, they can handle the programming, but they're really starting to look at the whole project. Everybody, in a sense, being a project or a product manager, understanding the whole direction of where the company's trying to go.
Thanks, Ron. Pam?
Yeah, and speaking of that and looking at that holistically is not only the technical skills that are needed, right, but those soft skills, right? And Ron's already spoken about some of them, but some that I would really love to call out are resilience, right? There's a lot of change, the ability to learn forward fast, right? Adaptability, communication, collaboration, creativity, critical thinking skills, right? Which we see a lot in the IT space, but looking at that as connecting dots for the whole organization. Those are all things that we've been talking about for years, but I think we're going to see those on steroid quite a bit in the future. But there's some new ones that are coming, and that is understanding labor market regulations, understanding policies, understanding what's happening in the world around us that influences how technology is used, how it is governed, how it is created for everyone who's working with it, because we will have more multi-generations working within the technology at different levels of understanding. So I can also see a rise in more individuals really employing design thinking skills and designing for the human in automation. And with that comes a really strong sense of emotional intelligence and empathy as well. So bringing all of that together, we know it's a lot to ask, but I think that's where as leaders, we have the opportunity to make sure we're creating those learning opportunities and those development opportunities for, it's not just about the job that you're hired to do that's on your job description, but it's the approach to the work that's going to become significant as well.
Chris, real quick, I forgot to actually mention this. I just want to bring this up really quick. The one thing that we've seen, the trait that we've seen explode the most over the most recent months has been in job postings is trustworthiness. As we are looking at probably the craziest times that we've ever seen in cybersecurity, as has been well publicized, we are very, very shy of the number of people that we need to secure systems. And if you think about open models and you think about AI, just the risk that's involved if a system gets infiltrated by bad information, how it could take down a company, how it could really ruin a customer experience. In the past, we were worried about cybersecurity because it might steal a credit card number. But now when you think of cybersecurity, you're going to have to start to think of it in terms of it could bring down a whole corporation. So I think as we're looking at AI and all those things, we have to also be really, really growing our talent pool of people who are very, very sharp in the cybersecurity space. So I expect that to also, I don't really expect it to explode because it's already exploding, but I think you're going to see continued emphasis on that particular space, especially next year.
And my comment will be here for those job seekers watching this chat. The communication soft skills are absolutely essential. The emotional intelligence is there, but understanding the business challenge and problem and how it affects the user is something you really have to dive into and be able to articulate in your experience how you've done that in the past. And when you're interviewing, ask questions along with that. So I think that the interviewing cycle is going through a transformation where it's going to be coming more that way. And Ron, I think you said that the soldiers that were in the back office are very limited now in their opportunities. You have to have a full Monty of understanding. So let's transition to what industries will have experienced the most growth in tech roles over the next few years. Pam, would you like to take the lead on that?
Happy to, yeah. So there's quite a few that are really fascinating, especially as we look at what doesn't exist today that's going to exist, right, in the future, and what does exist today. A couple of those that we all are aware of, which I know Ron will speak to, we've already spoken to, a lot of the roles that we're all very familiar with. But I think that those that are also going to grow are your ed tech space, right? You're also looking at what's going to happen within the sustainability, how that's going to morph and change, not only here in the US, but globally. Looking at healthcare and biotech, as well as the way that energy and utility is going to look in the future. There's also some other fascinating ones, right? When you're in that green space, some of the future jobs I saw were trash designers, because as a society, we've gotten to where do we stash our trash is one of the things that is talked about, right? Is that, what are these energies that we are not even talking about yet that are going to become really relevant because of how the world around us is changing? And so I think we definitely need to lean into those. And the one that we have mentioned a few times, and I've mentioned a couple of times as well, is sustainability and green jobs, and watching how that area is continuing to develop, right? And what that looks like. And how that is also influencing the skills that are coming out of universities, that are coming out of certificate programs, where people are interested, because this is work that's aligned to how people want to work, to purpose, for the type of work that they want to do. And making sure your comment, Chris, regarding talent watching this, right, is where are the people that want to do the work? What do they want to do? What does that environment look like? And really paying attention to that. We already know what the labor shortage numbers look like between now and 2030. How are we really paying attention to that and looking at not only this from a labor perspective, but how work gets done, and then also who's doing that work?
Great response, Pam. Ron?
This is a tough question to answer. I want to answer from the side that's where I hope to see it go. I'll also mention towards the end where I think it's going to go. And unfortunately, I think there's a little bit different. So where I hope it goes is there are two paths for where we're going with technology. Number one, there is the new frontiers, the biomed side that Pam mentioned, this concept of how can we use this technology that we keep learning from to maybe come up with new ways of doing treatments and new ways of utilizing the things that we already have, rediscovering uses for drugs now, because we can load so much into that. And if that happens, that will open up a lot more opportunities, I think, in the biomed space. I would love to see going down that path. I would love to see the technology and AI we're doing, looking at industries that are truly going to be starved for workers. Take healthcare, take a registered nurse, something, it's by far the most posted job in the United States right now. And it's not just the United States, around the world, you see this need for registered nurses. I would love to see technology coming into the space and say, how can we make it so that people who aren't registered nurses can successfully do these tasks without having the certifications, without having the degree, so we can take some of the burden off. So this would be a kind of a reshaping of industries. I would love to see technology going into those things and saying, any industries that have single points of failure, where one person seems to have all the responsibility, can we use these technologies to get other people to be able to perform that work? One company I talked to was using AI to help truck drivers who could not speak English to still almost be like they were speaking English. They had the tools in the dashboard. So as they were dropping their loads off or doing all of these transports, they didn't need to have a mastery of the English language. A wonderful use of technology. I hope that that's what we start to see more and more of. I think there are a lot of companies out there that want to do that. There's always that fear that I have in the back of my mind, and that is that a lot of technology ends up in kind of entertainment, which is for me probably the least valuable application, but it's also one that there's a lot of money in, there's a lot of interest in. So I think, that could create opportunities as well. And I think ultimately that's what people want. However, as I look into the future in the world of work and the shortages that we have, I really hope that we continue to see companies investing in ways of alleviating pain versus providing pleasure.
Great
I'll just jump
answer,
in there. I'll just jump in there as well, because I really love that response, Ron. And it's really about unbundling the work, right? And looking at the different segments of the way work gets done and which part of the process that another individual could do it or that technology could do it. And that really takes us into a view of looking at, well, where's the demand leading that? So it's also looking at what do job descriptions look like for the future, right? And really taking a quick look at that, and actually a quick and a studious look at it to say, how are we unbundling this? How are we looking at a skills-based model, right? And not a job description-based model for this. So I think that's one that's really exciting. I think we're going to see accelerate probably a little faster than some of the others.
Pam, you're so interesting. You said that I presented Monday in Houston, and that was a conversation piece: is the candidate-centric job posting versus the traditional or skills-based. And in today's market where supply is not meeting demand, is you got to speak to the candidate and what they want. And the reality is the person you're trying to hire is employed. So what's the compelling reasons that you have to offer to them? What's the pitch? Some other industries I'll add in there. I think when I mentioned them lunch was agritech. Living in the Southwest U.S. for myself, water. how do we filter water, get more supply of water and use it. I think there's a lot of opportunities for technology to come into play there. And then the semiconductor industry, we see the major plants opening across the U.S., the influx of jobs for various reasons. But I think you're going to see more and more of that in that opportunity. So moving to our last question, what we've seen, or at least what I've seen over the last year or two, is the wage growth has slowed down. I think what you saw in the pandemic is many job seekers were able to go to the market and get significant increases in base pay from 20 to 50%, and in the last year that's stabilized down to stabilize in the market to where they should be. Now they're coming to the market expecting the same, and it's not happening. Just curious for what you guys think will be going on in 2025 as the market may surge as we expect, and what are some compelling offers the employers can make to attract talent? Pam, do you want to lead off on this one?
Sure. So, I mean, one thing that is pay attention to right now, and it was a big signal from the election, is what's happening with inflation in the economy, right? You can't take that out of the equation. So that definitely has to be a consideration. There's the considerations of, the affordable housing catastrophe that we have now. It's beyond a crisis, it's a catastrophe. And so I think it's important to look at those external factors. But as we look at how we can consider that and look at some compelling offers for talent, is benefits is a big piece of that. How are we looking at different employee experiences and flexibility when it comes to benefits? For example, is there a development benefit that's available that can be taken place? Many companies have brought in the call map as a benefit, right? Looking at, are there other benefits that follow the challenges and the problems that the people that are working, and how do we help solve for those within some of those creative benefit structures? And I'll give you an example. I was actually on a call today with a partner that we use for AI coaching. Their name is Pandatron. And so what they do, instead of having an actual coach in a conversation live like we're having right now, it's actually an AI coaching session that has empathy built in, that has emotional intelligence built in, that has some machine learning built in for responses. And I was talking to them and I said, have you explored that option as this potentially being a benefit that companies could offer? And they said, no, we haven't. And one of the main individuals that I work with at Pandatron said, we have, they're actually in a European country and they have a lunch benefit. And she said, I would forego the lunch benefit and take this as a benefit for myself, right? If I were there, just as an example. So how can we get creative? So if we want talent to come more creative and more agile and how they bring their soft skills to work, how are we looking at that as corporations, as employers, just overall? And really looking at it, again, through the lens of the person who's doing the work and what benefits do we offer. Because the other great thing about benefits is, for the most part, they're not taxed. So that's also a benefit for talent as well.
Ron?
If we go back through history, when we look at the labor force, there's always a pendulum. There's sometimes that corporations are really starved for workers. In IT, we can go back, and I was working at the Bureau of Labor Statistics at the time in the year 2000. And you saw this insane desperation to get these people in. So signing bonuses went through the ceiling. We had people putting, blow up slides in their offices. You saw them doing anything they could to attract talent. When we saw in 21 and 22, with all that private equity money that came in, lots of money going out there, it was really a lot of pay increases, really unrealistic pay increases that were occurring. A lot of people kind of jumping ship, getting pay increases that probably would have taken them 4 or 5 years, and they were getting them right away. So there has to be some kind of reconciliation with that, and that's kind of what we're going through now. The private equity money's out. Companies are very careful about how they're spending this money right now. They don't have easy access to money with interest rates still being high on the lending side. So, right now companies hold a lot of power, and in that, as they're kind of looking at who they hired and how they hired, you see people doing things like, hey, ordering people back to the office. And it's a great way to kind of shed people in that process because, if you really want to kind of press in and try to get people away that maybe costs you a lot of money, you can do those kind of things. Companies will exercise those things when they have power. But the question here is, will they continue to have the kind of power next year that they've had in 23 and 24? I believe that in the beginning of the year, yes, they will. But as the year goes on, it's going to get really, really interesting to see how this plays out. After Trump was elected, the market went quite insane. And there was a lot of talk at that time, and Chris, you actually mentioned this earlier, that companies now are, starting to release recs, they're starting to release opportunities because they are starting to to build their path for the future. I feel like we just came off of a pause, and there are economists out there who think, well, 25 could be kind of a fairly bad year. And I'm not one of those. I feel like we're kind of setting up to wake up in the professional sector from the slumber that we just did in 23 and 24. It will not look like 21 and 22. But I feel like 23 and 24 corrected for some of that. I think what you'll see is more of a pace of what we were seeing in the late 20 teens, which was modest growth, people getting opportunities to do something more, just don't reach for the stars, just reach for the sky above you, reach for the clouds. I think that's a much more realistic path forward. I think also as we look at, we saw record applications for H-1Bs, some people kind of gaming that system, but you always have this out there. I mentioned at the beginning of this that there are many options available to companies that are hiring IT workers. So unless they're frantic, unless they're backed into a corner, I think you're going to see much more reasonable offers being made going forward. Something I want to say, and this is for anybody out there who's looking for a job, who's watching this. It is ultimately not great for the economy, your industry, your jobs when salaries go ahead of where they're supposed to be. Ultimately, that puts companies in a situation where they can't hire as many people. It actually dampens the demand, and that's kind of what we've seen in the most recent years. You want things to grow at a reasonable pace. I ask people, keep your demands reasonable. Think about the work that you're doing. Think about how it's building your resume. Think about where your long-term goals are. Don't seek an immediate cash return, or else you could be in a situation where a company loses its funding and then you're back on the street again. And I think it's kind of what I kind of expect this to look like next year.
Thanks, Ron. Just to add some things from my point of view too, is the personalized employee experience is really important when employers are going out looking for talent. Understanding work-life integration, potential upskilling, reskilling opportunities, defining the compelling reasons why to work for your company, from things like career advancement, company growth. Voice is an interesting one, and I often talk to people, us on this call have raised our kids with a voice, then they come to the workforce and we don't like their voice. It's our own fault. But being able to provide people that opportunity. And the one area that has really changed for me over the last 10 years is the question I get asked often is, what is the purpose of your employer? What's your sustainability policy? So generational wise, you have to be able to adapt to who you're speaking to, what's important to them. I have a 21-year-old daughter who's very focused on the environment. So we need to be able to address those opportunities or discussions with people like that. With that said, I want to conclude this conversation. I really want to thank Ron and Pam for their time. I believe their commentary in this meeting was excellent, and I hope all have gained some great insights for this. From Procom, we look forward to holding these meetings more often and bringing value to those who join. With that said, I want to say thank you very much for attending, and we'll talk soon.